Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues, and good afternoon to our speakers. And thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Susan Veldsman. I'm the Director of the Scholarly Publishing Program at the Academy of Science of South Africa. ASAF is hosting this webinar in collaboration with SciELO Brazil, celebrating its 25 years of existence. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. There are just a few practicalities that I would like to mention to you this afternoon. If you would like to enter or access the interpretation services, please have a look at the bottom of your screen. There's a little, almost like a round circle with stripes through it. You can click onto that icon and you will be able to access translations in Portuguese. So we are extremely grateful to Marcos, who will be our interpreter today. And I said in our pre-meeting is that, you know, I think that interpreters have the biggest job on earth, because I think it's actually quite difficult to translate as we go along. But thank you very much, Marcos, and thank you very much to SciELO Brazil for making these services available. So we've got a full program this afternoon. And I can see there are many people logging in already and coming from all over the world, from Durban to Buenos Aires. So thank you, and thank you for indicating where you're coming from. It's very interesting to see the origin of the people. So colleagues, we have quite an esteemed panel here this afternoon, and very grateful that they all agreed to participate in our discussions. What is very interesting, although they're sort of scattered across the globe, some of them actually still have some tentacles into South Africa and originates from South Africa. That always makes it very interesting to understand what a small world it actually is, with all with everybody out there. One does not realize that. It is a great pleasure then for me to actually introduce the speakers this afternoon. It will be Dr. Valda Vinson, who will be first on our agenda. We're speaking about, she's currently the executive editor for all the science journals. And in this role, she oversees research content, strategy, and editorial policy. And I'm quite impressed by the suite of journals which is under your jurisdiction, Valda. Really, it's quite significant. Science signaling, science translational medicine, science immunology, and science robotics, which is quite, or touch upon quite a broad and vast expertise field as such. She started in 1999 as an associate editor, handling research papers in the areas of structural biology and biochemistry. Then in 2013, she moved on as deputy editor, and in 2018 was appointed as editor, overseeing research content in the life sciences and social sciences at SciELO. And as said, she earned an MSc in chemistry from the University of Natal. It's now the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and then her PhD from Johns Hopkins University in 1992. And she was also a senior lecturer at the University of the Western Cape. I would also like to welcome Dr. Daniel Kulp. He's the current chair of the Committee on Publications Ethics. Daniel, I can just assure you, I think internationally, we always look towards COPE for direction and for advice and for best standards and practices in editorial processes. And so we're really looking forward also to your presentation this afternoon. So Daniel has been in publishing over 27 years. And in 1996, he started as a full-time editor for Physical Review B, and eventually advanced as the editorial director of the entire Physical Review portfolio. In 2020, he joined the publications division of the American Chemical Society as editorial director. Currently, and this past fall, he changed roles to become the senior director, research integrity and global developments. Dan has been involved in all aspects of publishing, including peer review, publication ethics, production, distribution, and personnel and financial management of journals. So colleagues, this afternoon, as we can see by who has joined and who has registered for this particular webinar, we can see that it's still causing quite a stir out in the publishing sector. because I think of the biggest concern is of sort of trusted information, etc., and a concern about predatory information, etc., and how one deal with that. So the researchers already began experimenting with ChatGPT when it was released in November 2022. And of course, I looked at ways how it can ease their work in terms of writing systemic reviews, literature searches, summarizing academic articles, etc., which many publishers actually wanted to reject before the trend gained traction. But I'm afraid that the trend is gaining traction, and it's quite a challenge for editors to understand now as to how to adjust their policies to make provision for ChatGPT or AI in general. We also will be looking at sort of the policies which has been developed by the publishers, as there were some publishers that was very quick to actually unconditionally reject the fact that ChatGPT could be viewed as an author. But then there were other publishers that sort of wade their feet into this gray area very differently, and sort of look at ways how they can facilitate the use and sort of giving broad guidance to researchers how to apply ChatGPT and AI in general into their research work. Because they are of the belief that scientific writing, that it could free up some time in scientific writing and for other research and science activities. But I must say, everywhere where we go, there's quite a lot of criticism about the misuse of AI and paper mills massively, and the effect it has on the work of editors, as well as on peer reviewers, as thinking that we are already so overburdened peer reviewers in peer reviewing the articles, etc. Of course, then another question arises, namely, whether traditional plagiarism checkers have caught up to AI detection, and can those tools be fooled any way or another? So this webinar is meant to actually discuss and gain clarity on all these various issues, and I'm sure through all these speakers we will actually be able to touch upon all these issues. How are we going to run this program this afternoon? I will ask, first of all, Dr. Valda Vinson, Dr. Daniel Kulp, and now I see to my dismay that I did not introduce my third speaker, and let me do that without any avail, and that's Dr. Kirstin Krauss, who also has sort of his tentacles into South Africa, but has immigrated to Ireland quite recently. Kirstin is a research advisor for Worldwide Information Services, where he has a leading role in developing research capacity services for WWIS, but also is a visiting researcher at Stadio Higher Education, which is a private higher education institution in South Africa, quite a new one, if I may add. He's employed as a full-time business development manager also at, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, Iontaofa Intelligence Limited, where he leads and oversees client engagement and the development of services for the knowledge and information provisioning sector. His research focused on ICT for development, critical ethnography. Postgraduate interests include youth and postgraduate student development and mitigating questionable scholarly practices. I would like to welcome those three. So we're going to take the presentations of all three these speakers, where I am going to open up a panel discussion, and we'll be able to actually pose some questions to our panel. Then we will get responses from two other speakers, which I will introduce just a little bit later. So Valda, it's then over to you to kick off this meeting, and thank you very much. Then over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, I think that should be up there.
Yes.
Hopefully you, yeah. So
yes. It's up there, Valda. If you could, there you go. Right.
Okay, thank you. So
thank you.
I'm just going to talk. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to the Academy of Science in South Africa and SciELO Brazil. It's delightful to be here today. And as Susan said, I've got strong ties back into South Africa and was actually visiting there just a few months ago. So it's very, very dear to me. So today I'm just going to speak a little bit about AI in publishing. Of course, this is still evolving, but I'll just talk a little about how we see it right now. And sorry, I'm just starting. Oh, golly. Never mind. Okay, Susan, you will just tell me when I'm running out of time. Okay, so as Susan said, as soon as ChatGPT came on the scene, many publishers reacted quite quickly. At Science, we came out pretty strongly, said text generated from AI or machine learning or algorithmic tools can't be used at all, either for text or for figures. And an AI program can't be an author of a science paper. Many people know the editorial written by our editor-in-chief, Holden Thorpe. This is probably our most cited editorial ever to date. And then Nature came out with a more moderate statement. I would say that our statement doesn't mean that we think that AI does not have a place in publishing. We really think that, of course, AI is going to have a place. We just want to see the guardrails in place. We want this developed a little more, and then we can sort of refine policies. We are very much influenced by our experience with image manipulation. Back in the day when gels went from being images taken by cameras, hard copy images, to images that could be manipulated on a computer, there were a lot of problems that arose because there weren't yet policies in place to deal with those images. And to this day, we deal with problems from papers that were published, in the late 90s, early 2000s, because they don't meet the requirements we have in place now. So we just want to be sure that we understand what we're doing before we move forward. I want to just quickly note that, AI is not just ChatGPT, and AI has been in science for a long time. We recently published a paper on coding by AI that came from Google's DeepMind. We also recently have published several papers on the impact of AI in protein folding and protein structure prediction. So, AI is doing great things and AI is here to stay, but we want to see it move forward responsibly. So when I was asked to do this talk, I thought, well, let me see what ChatGPT says. So I asked ChatGPT, what are the challenges and opportunities of using AI in scientific publishing? It had a lot more verbiage than this, but basically it gave me 4 pretty good points. Quality and accuracy of what ChatGPT gives you, the data availability and access. This is talking about what data does ChatGPT have access to, because the output it gives is going to depend on the input it gets. All the ethical considerations that Susan already has touched on some, and then the fact that ChatGPT is a bit of a black box. So, how do we use something in science when we don't really understand what we're using? Then there are other challenges that have been brought up by many people. The one is accountability, which is why we say ChatGPT may not be an author, because an author has to be accountable for what they write. ChatGPT, by its nature, cannot be accountable. The availability of algorithms and code. If you're actually going to use ChatGPT, for example, to do research, our requirements would require code availability. And then there's the question of data privacy. If you put anything into ChatGPT, that is no longer really, you cannot guarantee that that remains confidential and private. And the other thing I want to point out, which is a big challenge, that of course, all the data sets today have intrinsic bias in them. So ChatGPT is learning from a biased data set, and the lower the quality of that data set, the less curated it is, maybe the higher those problems of bias can be. So those are the challenges. And instead of just going to, well, here are the opportunities, the way I've seen this presented many times, I thought it struck me that a lot of times when I read the challenges, they're all kind of conceptual. And when I read the opportunities, they're all very action-based. And so I thought, well, but the challenges are sort of inherent in all those opportunities. So what I want to do now is go to, the places where we see that AI could be used, and what are the challenges in those uses. So the first, of course, is in doing the research itself, in the data analysis. And here is where we see things like, if anybody knows the protein folding field, these programs, AlphaFold and RosettaFold, have sort of solved the protein folding problem without really understanding it. But basically, the structure of any well-folded protein can now be solved by AlphaFold or David Baker's RosettaFold. But we have to remember that these algorithms learn from a pretty well-curated data set. They're getting the information from what any structural biologist will know, the PDB. This is this big data set of protein structures, but those are solved protein structures, a very well-curated data set. And they're also good metrics for success. So you can kind of have metrics to tell you, is this a well-folded protein? And so you're not going to come up with complete nonsense, probably, because it won't pass those metrics. But in most other fields, we don't have that advantage of a very well-curated data set and really good metrics to know how good our answers are. So the challenges are, we need sufficiently high quality data feeding in to ChatGPT, or to, if you're any AI program, if you're learning using an LLM like ChatGPT, that applies to. We need to have we are never going to get the bias out of the data. So trying to make a curated data set that's unbiased is sort of not possible. We're biased as humans. Everything we do is biased. So we have to have ways of accounting for bias in that data. Then we need a well-defined problem, so we're not introducing bias through our definition of the problem. And so here, I just want to point to a paper that ran in Science, which an algorithm was used to manage healthcare, and that led to racial bias. Now, this wasn't AI, but it happened because the algorithm used health costs as a proxy for health needs. And so this just points to the dangers of, what we input affecting what we output. Then, of course, it can be used in writing the paper. And here we're seeing all sorts of tools come onto the market, or a lot of them are being given out for free to start, so people can start to use them and incorporate them, and then I presume pay for them at some point. So we've got just some I've named here, tools like Cite, Consensus, Research Rabbit, and they're all aimed at sort of doing the background research, so synthesizing kind of meta-analyses of lots of papers, drafting the paper, even editing the paper. And so there could be, great advantages here. Can these tools expand our view? Can they introduce us to work and scientists we may not have found? I work for Science magazine. What we publish gets found by many, many people. And that's why people want to publish with us. There's some other really good journals that are way less easy to find. If you just do a Google search, who'll come up first? Can AI make this better? Can programs like ChatGPT or Cite or improve this so that we're finding more of the relevant research? Or will they just sort of reinforce the biases that exist? The challenges, of course, are one, accountability. If we're doing this, some of these programs are now citing their sources, so that's a good path forward, but others are not. So who is accountable for this data that's being found? The completeness and the accuracy of the data, of course, leads to bias. Some of these, if you have a huge data set like ChatGPT, you're going to be including a lot of inaccurate or misinformation kind of work. If it's highly curated, you're going to bias what's being used. So that's a balance that the AI software has to deal with. And as I said, the risk of entrenching existing biases. Then there's so that's the writing of the paper. Then we get to reviewing the paper, the editors and the reviewers looking at the paper. Here again, there are opportunities that are already being taken advantage of. Proofig is an image checking software that already uses AI. Authenticate is a plagiarism software. I don't believe that uses AI at the moment, but I can imagine that AI could really enhance these kinds of software. Also, over the years, I've looked at many versions of software to help find reviewers. I've never looked at one that was really good, in my opinion, but I can imagine that AI could make these tools much better. And maybe this could even improve diversity. We're always trying to diversify our reviewer pool. But again, we have the challenges of accountability, especially if you get to where you're actually using this as a tool to write textual reviews of paper. Who is responsible for what's written? I think we're a long way from that, though. And then there's the quality and accuracy of tools like Authenticate, tools like Proofig. What is their data source? How accurate is the information they're giving you? And then there's a big problem with confidentiality. Many chatbots retain their input data. So, things like Proofig, which we are working with Proofig, and we have worked very carefully to make sure that there are terms that protect the confidentiality of our data. But many chatbots retain input data, and so if you're a reviewer looking at a paper and think, wow, I'll just put this through ChatGPT or through one of these other softwares and see what similar papers I can find, or see what synopsis it gives me. That's a very dangerous thing to do, because the confidentiality of that paper is not necessarily retained. It becomes part of the corpus of that AI software. And then, of course, AI could be used in communicating the science. So here, there's sort of many opportunities. And I sort of have got two separate points here. The one is, for broader communication, for, my mother going into ChatGPT and asking a scientific question, it really matters what data set is being used. And so I think this is where open access becomes really important, because that makes it possible for this AI software to access the data. And I think that putting ourselves behind a wall at this point is not the way to go. It will just make misinformation more possible. I think for the peer-reviewed publishers who are putting out highly curated data, it's important that that data becomes part of the corpus. And so for science journals, the way we're doing that is we have one gold open access journal. That means that all the papers are completely available when the journal publishes. All our other journals are green open access, which means these journals, still have site licenses. They still have the model of basically an institutional license model. And so the version of record, the final published version of the paper, you get through having a site license or through being a member of AAAS. But the author-accepted version of the paper, which is the peer-reviewed, correct version of the paper, can be posted on a server like PMC, that's PubMed Central in the US, the European equivalent, other national repositories. The author-accepted version may be deposited on publication so that that's completely available to any of these AI softwares.
3 minutes left, Valda.
Thank you. So I think I said that. So AI could help contextualize the science and write the summaries for a lay audience. But what's important is what's available to this AI. And the challenge is that, you know, data sets used by chatbots will have biases and may include peer review publications that are not peer reviewed, and this could drive misinformation. And so but you know, I want to say, I just wanted to point out that misinformation far precedes AI. So here is a slide that presents something that was published in the Wall Street Journal that gave the opinion of the Florida Surgeon General. He quoted two preprints to say that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were effective against COVID when there were hundreds of peer-reviewed clinical trials out there saying that they did not have an effect. So, you know, we don't need AI to get misinformation, but what we want is that AI works against misinformation rather than enhancing it. Just for fun, I asked ChatGPT, is ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine effective against COVID? And it said, as of my last knowledge update in September 2021, there was limited evidence to support this. I think that was a tweak to ChatGPT because I believe prior to that, it had given a different answer, but at least it is updating. And then I just wanted to say that many governments are now looking at governance for AI. They're talking to people who are, you know, at Google, at Facebook, at Meta, and hopefully this will be productive. And I think the important thing is this was an editorial that published in Science, and ended with this is a wake-up call to the science and technology community to highlight the importance of integrating ethics and regulation basically at the beginning, at the development phase of AI. So there's hope that this will happen to allow this AI to be developed in a responsible way. So at the moment, I think it's like a game of chess, but you know, I think there's hope that we can use this for good. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Valda. Thank you very much for highlighting sort of the opportunities, but as well sort of the current pitfalls. And as you rightly said, looking forward to a more advanced sort of AI implementation and interpretation to take us forward. Thank you very much. I'll be handing over now to Dr. Daniel Kulp. Daniel, over to you. You have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Susan, and welcome everyone. Here, I'll just get my slides up very quickly. So again, I'm Daniel Kulp. I'm the current chair of COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. I think Valda did a great job at sort of setting the table and the framework for the ongoing conversation. As you can expect, I'll be focused a little more on what are the guardrails for their use. I don't want to debate or, you know, either be critical of or be positive toward the use of these tools, but we understand these tools will be used. It may even become ubiquitous in publishing in the near future. And so therefore we have to understand how they can be used to support publications and support the integrity of published output. Before I get into that, I just want to give a brief background on what COPE is and what it represents, so you understand where I'm coming from in the discussion this morning. So COPE began over a quarter century ago as an informal gathering of a few medical editors to discuss a growing concern over publication ethics, primarily in the biomedical field. Since then, it has grown significantly in both size and topical coverage, and represents a geographically diverse community of primarily editors, but also publishers and related organizations and individuals covering all academic fields. Even recently, over the past year, we have introduced membership for universities and research institutions so that they can participate in the ongoing conversation. So a little bit about COPE. Our purpose is to safeguard the integrity of the scholarly record through education and by supplying guidance on the application of methodologies to support ethical practices. Our vision is to foster an environment that will lead to a future where ethical practice is the norm, where there's an expectation that all participants act responsibly and ethically. Our mission is to provide practical resources to educate and support our members, provide leadership and thinking on publication ethics, and offer a neutral professional voice in current debates, as well as to foster an environment where such debate is embraced and tolerated. So that's a little bit about COPE, and it gives you, again, a good perspective on what my background and how I'm approaching this conversation. So as noted by Valda, soon after ChatGPT was introduced into the public sphere, a lot of publishers and journals reacted very quickly to start creating guardrails and starting to understand how ChatGPT can be used within the publishing environment. For instance, Holden Thorpe at Science had this highly cited editorial, as noted by Valda, where he clearly articulated the fact that ChatGPT cannot be an author, and at first really restricted the use of generative AI in manuscripts and in publishing, at least without the express knowledge and understanding of the editor before they're put into place. Around the same time or soon thereafter, other journals like ACS Nano, ACS Energy Letters put out more expansive discussions that went with the understanding that ChatGPT could not be an author, but then looked more closely at the use of these tools within publishing and the research environment, and basically started to create the basic framework of best practices about how AI can be introduced into the publishing environment. It really, the current discussions on the use of AI tools really were encompassed very recently, essentially last month at the SSP conference, that's the Society of Scholarly Publishing. They had a debate as to whether or not AI undercut or diminished the integrity of scholarly publishing. Those who felt that it was the case really focused on issues with ChatGPT. For instance, its hallucinations where it creates or makes up its own references. It makes very loose or very false connections between facts, and really debated on the issue as to whether or not it can be a trusted tool. On the other hand, those who felt that it would enhance the publishing environment looked really at what it could do to help with diversity and access to publications, meaning especially for authors where English is not their primary language, tools like ChatGPT can help them articulate more clearly sort of their background work or their methodologies and help support their attempt at getting their science read in a more unbiased way. And so there's a lot of give and take within this area. And these debates have really focused mainly on the new large language models like ChatGPT and the generative models like DALL-E, which can create images, figures, and in some cases, data by its training set and looking at the literature available to it. What has been somewhat ignored in the current discussion is that adaptive AI has been used for many, many years, as noted by Valda. We have used it in editorial for easing workflow and helping to make editorial decisions. We have tools within production to help support the text editing and enhancement of papers. And also they have been incorporated in integrity tools, basically using AI to help determine whether figures were manipulated or reproduced from other figures. And so there is a level of AI that has been used for since probably 2017 or so within the publishing environment that has advanced publishing rather nicely. It's only now that we have these tools that actually potentially create content that now there's a grave concern over the ethical use of such tools. As I noted, these things have occurred years ago. COPE has already looked and discussed the issue of using artificial intelligence in decision making. This original discussion document was first introduced in 2019 and then was updated in 2021. This talks about how editors and publishers can use artificial intelligence in the publication realm. However, as been noted, a lot of organizations, a lot of journals have looked at these artificial intelligence tools as to whether or not they can actually claim authorship on a paper. The World Association of Medical Editors and the JAMA Network, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, all joined in with the understanding that in the current environment, AI tools cannot be listed as authors. We fully understand it's a dynamic environment. These tools are evolving even as we speak here today. But right now, they cannot take responsibility for their submitted work. And as they're currently considered non-legal entities, they cannot assert the presence or absence of conflicts of interest or manage copyright licensing agreements. So within this framework, they do not meet the normal requirements that journals and publishers put forward to be considered as an author of a paper. And so this discussion, as you can see, is just been inflamed and has been front and center through the first 6 months of the year. We can see that there's constant questions about the challenges of using AI chatbots in journals and manuscripts. The issue, of course, of AI and authorship, and what's really been driving concerns lately is the ease at which AI can create, as I said, create content, create papers, all the way from the text through ChatGPT to the figures and data through something like DALL-E. Will this help support current ethical concerns like paper mills, etc., where AI can now cheaply, easily, and quickly create papers on the fly, which then will sort of infuse itself into the literature and poison the integrity of the scholarly literature. So with all of this in mind, really what we have to look at is what are the best practices. So as Valda said, where are the guardrails that will allow us to use AI? As I said earlier, we do not want to be, we don't really want to talk about whether or not it belongs in the literature. The understanding is that it's here. It is a tool that people will use. And so therefore, how do they use it in an ethical manner? And I think the first step is for authors to be absolutely transparent. They need to disclose its usage. We need to explain how it's used. For instance, as with any tool, as a researcher, you may have devices that you use to analyze samples or to take samples. You have micrographs, you have certain analytical tools. It's natural that you would then explain its use, explain how you used it, have an understanding of its limitations, and to be clear about those limitations. And so it is clear to COPE that we can at least approach this as we have any other piece of equipment that we would use in research, any other tool that we currently use as scientists, developing our research and collecting data. And what's of critical concern here too is especially where has it been used in the manuscript? As I said before, something like ChatGPT can be very good at helping gain access to potential publication venues for those that have seen biases and barriers in the past. These tools can help them express in a language that may not be their primary language, so that they're clear in expressing themselves, and therefore they'll have greater opportunities to be published. So there's certainly positive ways that these tools can be used. It's just that we need to be transparent about the usage. If we deny or ban its use, the likelihood is that they will continue to use them, but then do it sort of under the table. And then we'll have a greater difficulty at understanding how it's coming into the literature and how we can better trust what we're getting in terms of manuscripts and new results. Ultimately, as I think Valda had noted as well, authors need to take responsibility. There needs to be a certain level of accountability. We understand that there are limitations to these tools, and the authors have to be aware of those limitations. If they use them, they have to be able to review the output, ensure that there are no made-up citations, that the data set being used by these tools, if they instill a bias, that they're able to either explain the bias or remove it in the final version. Essentially, at the end of the day, when we look at a published paper, it is the entire bit of content is the responsibility of the authors. So they need to move forward and take that responsibility. So from the position of, oh, thank you. I'm actually almost done. At the end of the day, when we look at best practices, where those guardrails are, it really lies in these two key features: the transparency and the accountability or responsibility of the authors. If taken in this way, we can shine a spotlight on its use. And I believe that in doing so, it will be harder to misuse these tools and hopefully a little easier to counteract the bad players who are trying to use it to misdirect or actually misuse the literature for their own gains. So actually, that's where that stands. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I turn it over back to Susan.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you for reminding us that AI has actually, to a certain extent, been sort of embedded in our editorial processes, etc. It is good to be reminded that it has actually been there for a very long time. But thank you also very much for starting to touch upon research integrity and ethics and the responsibility that goes with that. That's a very interesting dimension that you brought to the table. Thank you very much. Right, so now we will move over then to Kirstin. Kirstin, over to you. You have 15 minutes for your presentation. I will warn you a couple of minutes before when you should end. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, colleagues. When ChatGPT came out, I thought to myself, if I take the instructions that I gave to my honors students when I was still with UNISA, can I generate a mini thesis, mini dissertation with ChatGPT? Now, my assumption was that since we had about 1,400 proposal students at that stage and about 40 plus mini dissertation students, all doing the same methodology, which I asked them to be qualitative case study research and thematic analysis, that the similarity between what I produce in an AI-generated dissertation will be quite high. So I went about, took me about 4 days. It took the same instructions and training. I gave my students a dissertation template, which basically gave the layout of, all the different chapters, how a typical introduction could look like, what one would look for in a methodology chapter, that sort of thing. And basically within 4 days, I generated a thesis with prompting of about 57 pages and a dissertation of about 37 pages. And what I was really wanting to look at is, if one looks at the different phases of writing where ChatGPT specifically will be useful. Now, in terms of the different phases of writing, there's basically the 4 phases. I'm not going to go into detail, but just to show how I try to connect to this is that the initial phase is basically the phase where you're supposed to generate ideas. It's where writing is a form of thinking. It's often a phase that also goes along with literature searches and literature reviews. Then the drafting phase is where all of the writing and all of the ideas that you've generated all over the place are being crafted into an argument or an imaginary conversation for the scholarly community. Phase 3 is editing, where you refine your writing in such a way that you look at language, spelling, vocabulary, expectations of the journal, of the community. And then the final phase is where there's some sort of engagement with the community through either peer review. And then basically what the community produces feeds back into the generative writing, because the next research, phase of researchers will use the articles produced. So from what my experiences was that we actually basically need 3 types of tools. We need to look at similarity and plagiarism. We need to look at AI writing detection, but one that is kind of left on the side is the references checking. Because the biggest fallout for what I've seen now with AI is that it's absolutely bad, especially ChatGPT with references, reliable references. And under references, I would say that one needs to look for quality of sources, whether the sources that you use are questionable or predatory, and also whether there's alignment between in-text referencing and the actual list of references. So those are the 3 sorts of detection tools. And I would say, if one can, get a green flag from all 3 of those, there's a good chance that what you are reviewing or reading is not AI generated. So what I did also with this dissertation is I gave it to a colleague and said, well, can you please examine this as if it's an honors level thesis in computing? He had this to say. My colleague said the reading is a bit bursty. The sentence construction could have been smoother. I would have liked if a theory was used to support the questions, which is actually what I'm now going to try and do with my next dissertation or my next thesis, to have it more theory driven. Very important, as you said, it's overall a good essay, and very few lecturers would have noted it. And also, he was concerned about the possibility of false positives. I took this dissertation, and I also decided, well, I need to check for similarity or plagiarism, and obviously then AI detection. I started playing with a couple of tools. The first was Turnitin, assuming that after almost 1,600, 500 students dealt with the topic, that I would find high similarity. I did not get that through Turnitin, at least. Turnitin's similarity AI tool flagged 79% AI, which is actually low. I was wondering where's the other 21%, because I only wrote about 5 sentences, just to connect a few paragraphs or sections, and then the structure was given to them. I then also took it to some competitors in terms of plagiarism. I went to originality. That same dissertation got 100% AI detection, but the plagiarism score was quite low. I found originality to be quite a tool. In some way, I think it's maybe oversensitive. But what's nice is that at least gives you something to work with. I found that it's not really suitable for the academic environment because you cannot really upload large documents. So Turnitin still stands out as the better one of the lot. I tried GPT-0, and then funny enough, it says it's written entirely by a human. So there's inconsistency. I also went to Scriber. Scriber uses the same platform as Turnitin, and another percentage in terms of the plagiarism score. So the similarity score. So in terms of AI detection and similarity, it was kind of difficult to get consistency between the different tools. As I said, one of the issues that I had was to really get good references, and I thought to myself, can I generate references retrospectively? In other words, feed it into something and see if it can give me references. I played around with a tool called Cramly. I found that it's really more for entry-level essay writing. It gave me some stuff, but not something that I really found useful. Funny enough, I've fed my own AI-generated dissertation into Cramly, and it said, each AI detector, and it said it's 98% human written. And I actually asked it to generate something, and I fed its own generated AI back to it, and it said it's likely to be entirely human. So there's a lot of inconsistency in these AI detectors. So it's not like you can use it. It's even more like, I would say, AI biased, if you want, than Turnitin. So it needs a lot of assistance, human intervention to actually interpret what you get. I tried a source called Sourcely to see if it can generate references. Again, this tool was for smaller essays, maybe up to 3,000 words, but I didn't really find it useful. So really where AI falls out is it generates stuff, but it's very weakly, at least so far I can see it weakly linked to sources. One thing that I felt that really stood out for me was if I check my references alignment, in-text versus list of references, I found ReciteWorks to be quite a useful tool, although it also has its limitations. Although I believe it's a bit old school, it actually forces a person to, as an author, to really make sure that references are good. And so this really, I would say, is one of the more reliable ways of doing it, although I'm not sure if ReciteWorks is entirely ready for what comes to them if many people start pushing AI-generated articles through there. One thing that ReciteWorks would do is if there's a problem with your references, it won't even scan it, it will tell you fix it. So maybe it's a good thing, and maybe one can use this in combination with something like Mendeley. So in terms of the 4 phases of writing, this is my observation in terms of ChatGPT, not the paid for version, the free version. It can help with generating ideas, but it's in some way, I would say, avoid it unless you work deductively. In other words, there's some sort of understanding already in the community about the theory that you want to use. Then you can say, well, it's useful for generating ideas. When it comes to crafting an argument, I really found it extremely limited there in such a way that I would even avoid using it because science is actually all about quality, scientific inquiry and argumentation, and AI kind of falls off in that sense. When it comes to editing, I felt it to be very useful, especially assisting with grammar and spelling. Changing tenses, for example, fitting the expectations of the genre. But I felt personally, for me, it kind of smothered my own style. And so, when you use it for editing, you must really break it down into very small pieces and be very specific to tell ChatGPT to do the bare minimum. So in terms of the different phases, this is just a very brief overview of the sort of tools that one can use at the different phases of writing. I think with the generative writing, there's a couple of tools like Perplexity, Semantic Scholar, ChatPDF, Elicit, that can really help connect different papers and do the heavy lifting in terms of information overload. In terms of the peer review phase, I thought, well, we need to look at AI detectors and plagiarism almost in combination. But in terms of reference management, I think there's a big need to look at that as a way of almost indirectly identifying whether something is AI generated. Where AI really fell out of the bus was with the argumentation side. When it comes to argument flow, paragraph flow, hedging techniques, weaving the golden thread, you really need a human being to, and also theoretical elaboration. You need a human being to come in there. So these are just, some of the principles of, argumentation. I didn't find AI to be good at this. In fact, I would rather avoid doing it. Structuring a section as opposed to a paragraph, where there's a development of thematic development, something that I don't think AI can do, ChatGPT at least. Making data theory links, Wilson said the researcher's mind is the best tool for analyzing, making data theory links. So just in the last 3 minutes that I've left, what did I learn from the prompting strategies? I thought to myself, there's so much, rigorous rubbish already generated that maybe, at basic level research, one can use ChatGPT as a tutor to teach basic research structure. And I just have a few examples just to illustrate the point. For example, in this case, this was a prompt that I gave to ChatGPT, and I said, here's a topic and there are research questions. Generate the article, and if you use this prompt and the student uses this, the student gets the idea that you need to develop something in line with your research questions. It emphasizes the principle of the research question demarcating the study. In this case, giving ChatGPT a couple of themes and say generating open-ended interview questions talks to the need for constructive alignment between literature themes and data collection. This one talks to, that the findings of a chapter should also align with what you've placed in the first chapter. And it talks to the constructive alignment between what you have in the first chapter, what you have in the findings. This one talks to the need for quality references. This prompt will probably teach a student, that ChatGPT is not good. I better find my own references. And it's important to get those references, which is a basic principle of scholarly writing at the entry level. What an introduction should do, thematic development of a review of literature, how to be consistent in tenses, sometimes AI generates something in a present tense or future tense, and you need to have it consistent with the rest of the document. That was quite useful in that sense. And I see I've got a minute left, Susan. The importance of an argument roadmap. By the way, this was absolutely auto-generated by ChatGPT, brilliant piece of work, but it still teaches a student that something like an argument roadmap can really guide a reader through a paper or a dissertation. How one should self-assess your research questions, for example, by creating purpose statements, and then the importance of explaining data analysis. So these are just a few prompts. There's many more, as I said, close to 60 pages. But these are sort of prompts that I believe could, help students understand the structure of an entry-level dissertation. And I'll stop at that. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Kirstin. Certainly one can see that you move around in the ICT field, all your experimentation, and also being in sort of the academic world is to experiment with what is out there and how can it be applied. Thank you very much for demonstrating those tools and giving your opinion on how effective they are, as well as stressing the inconsistency amongst these detection tools, because I think that's quite a big challenge, etc. So thank you very much for that. And then to all my speakers, thank you for keeping in time. We are really quite spot on time. Thank you very much for that. So colleagues, I think you would agree this is a fascinating discussion that has taken place so far. I would just like to ask perhaps Alex from SciELO Brazil, I wonder if this is not a good time just to gauge actually where are all our participants coming from. So Alex will put up a poll, and if you can spend just less than a minute just to quickly complete this form, and we will feed through just to get a sense of what is the spread of participation this afternoon. So thank you very much for that. Do support. I do appreciate your effort in this regard. Right, I'm going to move on because I don't think that poll is so difficult to complete. I would like to just attend to those questions that have already appeared in the question and answer box for our three panelists. Then I will move over then to introduce our two next panel members and invite them to perhaps also react on the three presentations we've just heard, and also add their own viewpoints, which is also indicated in the agenda. Right, so I am going to start right with, oh, thank you, Alex. You were quite fast on this one. So most of our participants are from Africa, then Asia, Europe, North America and South America. That is great. Thank you very much for that. That's very interesting. And it's very exciting to participate in something like this. Thank you so much. I'm going to move over to the questions now. If I can ask then my three speakers to please switch on their cameras and to enable us to have just a little bit of a discussion. So the first question is by Dina LaRue that says, do you foresee problems with AI drawing on AI-generated content, essentially lessening quality like photostats or photostats that's in a spelling? Well, you can see the spelling in the questions. Carolina, would you like to answer this? I'm not sure. Oh. Carolina, just be clear that you post everything now on your Google Doc, of which I don't have the URL now. Can you just assist me on that? Sorry about that.
Oi, eu só capturei as perguntas, tá? Vocês podem pedir para os palestrantes responderem. Eu só marquei para ficar que a pergunta ia ser respondida online, na discussão.
Susan, you may select which questions you want to ask for the panelists. Do you have access to the documents?
And no, I don't. I'm still on the question and answer box.
Yes, we will send you again on the chat.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Did you get it?
Thank you.
Just okay.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. Let's just keep some nice order here. It will facilitate some good discussions, I'm sure. Sorry, it's just loading. Okay, right. I am going to repeat, and that is, do you foresee problems with AI drawing on an AI-generated content, essentially lessening quality like photostats of photostats? Anybody that would like to respond? And that was actually directed to Valda.
Well, that's an interesting question. And of course, I mean, if AI generated content becomes part of the corpus of data, then it would be drawn on by AI. So, but I think it's just part of the larger problem that we have to balance between, you know, what data is this AI using? So, for example, you know, are you using preprints, which are unpeer reviewed? Are you using gray literature, which is sort of, have you excluded predatory journals? So I think that AI generated content could just be part of that. And then you run into the problem of, and there are many, many more. A lot of the tools that people brought up during this time are much more bespoke, where they have a defined data set that they're looking at, things like site. So then the question is, what is that data set? And maybe they could prevent AI generated content from getting into their data set using tools to detect it. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a game that we're playing here.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think this goes back to exactly what Valda was saying. It is just the integrity of the training set. You know, the extent of it, right? The original ChatGPT only had a training set that ended, like, I believe, like November of 2021. So any results that occurred over the past year plus, year and a half, is not included unless it was part of a query. And so there's limitations to accuracy there. And then if you're building AI interpretation on that, you're just enhancing all the biases or the misunderstandings. But, you know, from my perspective on ethics, you know, this is the type of issue I'm very worried about when you look at like paper mills, where they can generate a paper and then use these more generative AIs to then produce the data, the figures, sort of the imagery to go with it. And if we're not able to see how it's interacting, if we take superficial looks at it, then these, as fully blown published papers, get into the literature with a check mark on it, and then it just continues to poison the integrity of the whole system.
Thank you very much. So our next question then comes from Karen Essler. To ask, to what extent can we influence the development of AI tools? For example, when adding queries, can one indicate only use peer-reviewed literature to derive conclusions? She says that it's not possible now, but could this be a recommendation to developers?
I mean, I guess I don't have a good enough understanding of AI, but I don't think it's not, from my understanding of it, it's not really similar to a search engine. I mean, really. So it's just using all the data it has and predicting, you know, what the next word will be, or what the, and so I think that probably, from my understanding, the way forward will be more to create these AI tools that have very curated data sets, rather than trying to say, I only want to use this part of your data set.
Kirstin, do you have some ideas around this?
Yeah,
this question?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. There are tools like ChatPDF, Elicit, and the others that I actually briefly showed them there. With ChatPDF, for example, you can upload a PDF file and you can chat with that file. So you basically give it the data to chat with. There's also Elicit, you do searches, and what it then does is it gives you an opportunity to actually talk to the abstracts of all the papers. So there are ways to look at it. I don't believe that this can, replace the rigor of a typical systematic review of literature, but it can help you do the heavy lifting. So there are tools already doing that, which I briefly showed my slides.
Yeah, the way Cite is another tool that does that kind of thing. That's also, yeah.
Yeah, Cite also does that. And so one of the principles of doing a good review of literature is this principle of forwards and backwards referencing. And then there's a tool called Connected Papers, which exactly does that for you. It does forwards and backwards referencing. The only thing is it tends to have more access to the partners that they partner with and open access journals. So in that sense is a bit limited, I would say.
Thank you. So there's another question from Lillian Carlu. Lillian, thank you very much for expressing your appreciation for this session. And we've got many also in the chat boxes of appreciation. So thank you very much that you are sort of engaging with us and telling us and giving us feedback. She's asking that, do you think that it's probable that peer reviewers use AI to perform peer review and they would appropriate such content as being of their own? Would it be possible to identify those AI reviews?
Do you mind if I answer, Susan?
You're welcome. Open to any of you three if you have an answer.
Yeah. So with this generating this dissertation, I asked ChatGPT to actually suggest improvements on some of its own work. Okay, and then it would, for example, go through a section, let's say the lit review section, and it would say, I suggest improvements in this and this and this area. And then I would say, okay, take number 3 and implement that improvement. And it tends to do that, although I would not say it's done the best way. So I'm quite certain that reviewers will use ChatGPT, feed it content, and come up with suggestions and just give it back to the editors to get back to the admin at work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel, sorry, no.
No,
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
I think Daniel can talk to the ethics. I would, yeah.
Yeah, I was, that is actually an area that's of great concern, right? I mean, I think part of the process and the integrity of the literature is to have that, that human interpretation of a paper. Kirstin has done a great job at showing the limitations of the current models and where it doesn't quite work. And as we talked about, there's a lot of bias in the literature now, at least in the training set literature that these tools use. And for a paper to be sort of held within that biased environment, then you would expect the report to be biased as well. So ultimately, I think it just goes back to that transparency and accountability. A referee, I believe, could probably use one of these tools to help take a quick perspective of how the paper fits in the sense of novelty or within the literature environment. But they have to take ownership of it and understand that they can't just pass it on, but they actually use it as just an extra piece of information to develop their own interpretation. That is probably the most ethical use of it. Again, I wouldn't want to say you should deny the use of it because then they'll just use it underhandedly. It'd be much better for them to use it transparently and let editors know that it's being used in that regard.
Yeah, and just from an editor's perspective, I would say that, at the moment, we're not using AI detection software, but I can imagine that we could be soon. But from from an editor's perspective, we are looking at reviews and going, are they accurate? Are they biased? So we would still be looking at all our reviews with those criteria, and hopefully that at least gives some protection to the authors.
Yes, thank you very much to all three of you, especially Daniel and Valda, to highlight sort of the responsibilities we have as a peer reviewer. And it is a sort of an academic citizenship that we still have to conduct, and we sort of owe it to the community at large to give at least the human involvement into the peer review process as well. And I agree, most certainly AI can use as a tool for initial sort of gauging of certain things, but I think the human involvement is very important. But that again, it also highlights what you've said, Daniel, that the transparency and the responsibility, to take responsibility thereof, is very important, and to declare our intentions also beforehand will be very important when we conduct these peer reviews, and if we would use AI in our peer reviewing. But I agree with you, it's actually of quite a big concern, this peer reviewing and the use of AI. But thank you very much for your thoughts. I think you're spot on with those. Then I want to move to Alexandra Mozalvajik. What do you think about relationship AI ChatGPT with open science? Scientists from all over the world have to use open access and pay for it, and the publications become public. Any thoughts on this?
I'm not, I think if it's advocate, I mean, I think science has, we have one, I completely agree with the premise that what we want is for the scientific literature to be available, because that's becoming more and more important. Open access paid for by the authors has been sort of the prevalent model to do that, because unless you have a big philanthropist funding you, we all have to pay to publish these, to curate and publish this literature. At science, and I'm not saying there can't be more than one model, but at science, the view we've taken is we do have one completely open access journal where the authors have to pay to publish in that journal. But for our other journals, we have taken the view that we want those to be open to everyone. We don't want to put, a $10,000 mark onto a science paper and make it become a journal that you have to be able to afford to get into, or we have to have some very complex waiver system that has its own real problems. So what we've decided is instead, we have a model where the version of record is only available by site license or by subscription to the journal. But the author accepted manuscript, which is all that any of these softwares would need, it is the paper, it is the final reviewed paper, is openly available without payment. So that's the model we've gone with. But whatever model you use, I agree that it's becoming increasing. It is very important that publishers don't try and wall themselves off. I mean, and you can see the possibility that huge publishers would say, well, we're just going to use our own corpus. So I think the more, the societies, the people, like science, the more we can all get behind, let's make this all available so that we can have generative AI being positive. I think that's a really good way. I think that's very important.
Thank you very much. I am just going to allow one more question. I'm going to let other questions stand over till after our two other speakers have given their contribution to this discussion. And I would like to touch on the one from Marina Yubad that says, what about allowing authors to list ChatGPT as a co-author, but the human authors are responsible and accountable? Who would like to take it? Daniel, would you like to give it a go? We'll start.
Yeah, I mean, that has been one of the arguments, is just, do you just include it as a co-author with an asterisk saying, this is an AI tool, so therefore it's only an author in this certain constrained realm of responsibility. But these other human authors take a broader responsibility. It's certainly been part of the argument and part of the conversation, but right now we have very clearly delineated what are the responsibilities that that help authors create the byline, and they apply this across all contributors. And so we believe that by fairly doing it across all contributors, including AI tools, it moves them more into the acknowledgement phase. Just as if you had a colleague who helped, maybe did something with a sample or something, and you wanted to acknowledge their contribution, but they didn't take full responsibility of the entire project as a co-author. So these AI tools have participated, but in a very limited sense. So again, I think it goes back to they're more suitable as an acknowledgement with clear delineations within the manuscript of where their contributions are placed and how it's used. I think that is, at least currently, the most ethical and most intelligent way of introducing ChatGPT into publishing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that basically ChatGPT, for what it's doing, does not meet author requirements. And so therefore it would be in the acknowledgements. There was one thing I meant in my talk to briefly bring up, and I would just want to caution at the moment, I forgot to do this. ChatGPT, we know, Kirstin pointed out, it introduces errors, it makes slightly wrong connections, it does. Those things can be hard to find. If you're using ChatGPT to write your own paper, those little things can be very hard to find, but reviewers find them, and reviewers get angry very quickly. So I would really, the number of times, and I'm not saying this is ChatGPT, the number of times I see a reviewer say, this author made this silly mistake, therefore they don't know anything about this field. It's a silly connection for that reviewer to make, but they make it. So I would just caution, a lot of people are saying, oh, ChatGPT will be really useful for people who don't speak English, and maybe, but there could be biases that get brought in there that we are not thinking of. So I would just have that caution.
Thank you, Valda. Okay, right. I think we need to move on. How time flies when you're having fun, right? So let's just move on. And I would like to introduce then our two next speakers, Professor Johan Wasserman, who is a professor in the history education at the University of Pretoria. His current research interests include youth and history, teaching issues of controversy in an African context, identity politics, and school history. He's editor-in-chief of Yesterday and Today. And then I would also like to introduce Professor Wian Erlank, who is a full professor of law at the Potchefstroom campus of Northwest University, where he currently teaches space law and cyber law. Wian has been very involved in ASAF's activities. He was also part of the SciELO South African Advisory Committee, and he previously served as a member of the ASAF Committee on Scholarly Publications in South Africa. So please allow me then to hand over to Professor Johan Wasserman. Johan, please, can we have your comments and reactions to what you've just heard so far? Thank you very much. You've got 5 minutes. I will interject when necessary.
Yeah, I've actually prepared to comment on something much more broader as per the program. And it's, I want to try and take the conversation in a slightly different direction. And I'm going to speak about a section in the journal that I edit Yesterday and Today. We have a specific section deals with practitioners' voices, teachers' voices, and it allows us to deal with fast-moving events such as artificial intelligence and its impact on the publishing industry and on education. our journal serves a very large community, a threshold population of thousands. In other words, anyone who's a practicing history educationist. And what we're trying to do in the July edition is to think with our community about AI and writing and teaching and publishing. In other words, organically bottom up rather in a top-down manner, trying to democratize the debate around artificial intelligence, learn from each other, if you will, and also try not to be reactionary. Take a bit of a long view, educationally speaking. So in doing that, we've engaged for the July edition for the specific section, which is not, it is a peer-reviewed in the sense that scholarly opinions are expressed around it, but it is not your classical peer-reviewed articles, because these are shorter opinion pieces, practical pieces. Hence, the question was posed to the practitioners who use the journal, and I'm going to share 4 vignettes in this regard. What happens on the ground? What is your thinking? What are your experiences with AI and AI tools in your practice in the greater history education community? Why is it your experience? What is happening? Because this is about giving voice to practitioners who are our community for our journal. And within the couple of minutes that I've left, I'm going to share 4 vignettes. Vignette 1 deals with exclusive private school who deals with artificial intelligence by intellectualizing it, reading some of the literature, specifically in more serious newspaper articles, having discussions, and with the idea to move towards a policy. And they work from the premise that they could share these conversations with their learners. So that is vignette 1. The second vignette that I want to share deals with what I would call, within the South African context, and for our international viewers, I'm going to try and illuminate the South African context for you, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is to deal with private schools, in this case in a corporate setting. And yeah, artificial intelligence was dealt with in a very reactionary manner by curbing continuous assessment work at home, because on the one hand, there was the fear that the students would take advantage of what is available in terms of artificial intelligence tools to create assessment tasks at home, pass it off as their own, and do very well. So there's a curbing of continuous assessment at home, and a educational readjustment by bringing much of the work back into the classroom. In other words, class contact time is now being used also much more than in the recent past in the terms of assessment. Vignette 3 deals with, in the South African context, with a poorly resourced inner township school, where it was quite interesting. The teacher who collaborated with us and who shared their thinking on artificial intelligence says, well, rudimentary information communication technology has not even reached us yet. The last of our concerns is our learners using artificial intelligence. This is a suburban school problem. This is not an issue for us. This is passing us by as an issue. As a matter of fact, my colleagues are not even aware of this development. And the fourth and final vignette, before I'm going to draw some thoughts together, is a semi-urban township school where the contributing history teacher wrote about it being a real issue, and learners being able to use it very effectively for some of the continuous assessment tasks. And and so much so that the teacher deemed it to be problematic and has moved all assessment work to class-based work, whereby the teacher himself provides all the historical sources and evidence, in other words, not even allowing learners to access that, out of absolute fear of what will happen the final grade 12 exam when learners do not have access to this, and you have these discrepancies between the mark that was sent up for grade 12 learners and that which they're really going to achieve in the exam. So what, in a nutshell, what are these 4 vignettes in this specific section of our journal deals with real practical and fast-moving issues for our readers and contributors and subscribers to our journal? Firstly, ChatGPT speaks to a digital divide, and it speaks to kind of a broader kind of geopolitical issue and a class issue, and within the context of Africa to issues of race as well. Secondly, individual teachers are fast moving themselves in terms of reinventing kind of pedagogy, rethinking how to engage with this. And thirdly, there is sense of guardrailing. In some cases, there is a longing for a policy and a hoping for it to guide them. I'm really excited by what we're doing in yesterday and today by trying to open up this conversation beyond what we tend to hear in the media, and trying and to have a sense of what practitioners are doing, and hopefully in my and I suspect my 5 minutes is up, Susan, try to kind of bring a different kind of perspective and an angle to this debate, which from the perspective of the journal that I'm editing, I think is equally necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan, and thank you very much for bringing that particular lens to the table, where we already have to start in school education to educate and to see what the perceptions and sort of the implementation are towards AI, etc. So that really gives sort of the participants to this webinar really a flavor of the different settings within South Africa and sort of the challenges we have to face. And then how do you embed that into the editorial policies of your journal? So thank you very much for that. Wian, I'm going to hand over to you now to now apply your law lens as such. I'm looking really forward to that. And I'm not sure whether I'm interpreting the current South African law correctly, and that there's a very specific reference to machine readable, etc., software and texts. And that sort of really confuses the matter even more. But over to you, you're the expert. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan. Yes, there are some interesting things happening. I'll just share my screen here. And then you don't have to look at me for this whole session. And that is it. It is just the screen you're seeing in the front of you. As a talking point, perhaps, I cannot get this thing full screen. So, of course, technology always fails us. But the second thing is the picture you see there is a picture created by AI in a system similar to DALL-E. And it is what happens when you type into the prompt AI, ominous depiction of AI making decisions. So that is what the AI seems to think about it making decisions for us. Yes, I wasn't planning on really talking in depth about the legal issues, but let me quickly touch on the uncertainty of the situation. Depending on where you find yourself in the world, there is either a very strong stance against accepting that AI can have intellectual property rights, Then there is somewhat more progressive areas where there is a distinction. For some areas, there has been recognition that an AI can be the author for purposes of patent rights. So that is, creative processes, more in the engineering type of fields. And then, of course, the big question comes when we start talking about AI, can it be the author in terms of copyright? And indeed, I'm marking papers at the moment for my cyber law students, and that was a question posed to them, and the answer is not clear. But I believe pretty soon we will probably be seeing that AI could be given intellectual property rights as authors, as well as the question regarding legal subjectivity, the same as we have seen legal subjectivity of personality given to inanimate, well, relatively inanimate things like rivers and natural areas. The same will probably be done for AI somewhere in the future. So by no means is this a field from a viewpoint of law where things are clear. That being said, I have made a couple of notes here, and I will not be spending too much time. Hopefully I could speak about this for hours, and I think most of us are now relatively tired. But let me touch on the following things. The first thing, AI is a tool. The same for LLMs and ChatGPT. If you think about Google, people who go and look for information on Google, even today, how many years later, people are not able to make very effective use of it, and quite often just try and use the first 5 options that Google gives them, and they take that as the truth. So like any tool, its value depends on how you use it and how effectively you use it. At the end of the day, you still have to use it and decide what you're going to do with it. The second thing is, the old programming adage, GIGO, garbage in and garbage out. So whatever the data set is that especially LLMs work from, the creative models like DALL-E is a bit different, but generally speaking, the system can only help you insofar as you are using specific information. So indeed, if we are going to be seeing a lot more information generated by AIs, being cited by the AIs themselves, we will see that we get that photostat effect with the deterioration of knowledge. So it is something that we need to keep our eye on, but it's also something that will probably be sorted out in time by some people that are more knowledgeable about these things than I am. From an editorial perspective, there's 1 or 2 things that I did want to raise. Copyright and privacy. The previous speakers has touched on this, and this remains a very important thing. At the moment, it's a very gray area about any information that you enter into these LLMs. So if you are going to be running anything that you want to check for editorial processes through an LLM, you must know that you are basically giving that information free and gratis to the developers of the AI, and it is going to be used, incorporated somewhere. So make sure that you really want to do this and you are able to deal with the situation if that private information runs out into the wild. So I would be aware of using that. The second thing, if you're going to be running through your checks, you want to check whether an author has maybe generated something with AI, be very, very certain that you don't leave a copy on the database. For example, in Turnitin, you can deselect the option of having that document integrated into the database, because of course, as soon as it's in the database, and somebody then wants to check it, or it's published, then it could be flagged as actually being a plagiarized version of itself. And we don't want that. It could lead to a lot of false positives. Furthermore, never solely rely on the report. Always apply your mind and your common sense. At the end of the day, the AI that is used, and especially now, it is an AI that is used to determine whether an AI has created the document. So the plagiarism checker or the similarity checker is really using an AI. And interesting enough, my students had to do an assignment where they had to use LLMs. And as part of the assignment, they had to ask it a certain question. They had to write down what the question was, and they had to give the answer. Now, when we ran this through the plagiarism checker or the similarity checker, it came up with a couple of papers where it found the possibility of AI at about 50%. When I checked that, it was nothing that was generated by AI. So it was totally false positive. But the interesting thing is, with none of the 140 papers submitted, did the similarity checker pick up the fact that all 140 of them had the prompt and the answers that were generated by different AIs. So be very careful of relying on this for the moment. The human factor is still very important. Now, one thing that is important, and I don't think we've really touched upon this very much, is it's very important to have a clear editorial policy about AI. And my recommendation at the moment is to prohibit the use of it unless it is clearly quoted and cited in the text. There should be no ambiguity about whether something has been authored by AI or not. In other words, allow your people who submit to use AI, but it must be very clear. The person reading the document must not have any doubts about whether something was created by AI. And what I always then also say is, also give us the prompt. Tell us what you asked the AI and how you're using this. So the same as we said, we're not going to say use it as a co-author, but it should be cited the same as you would be citing any other source that you use in your material. Cite it. Don't be afraid of using it. It is the fourth industrial revolution, but we must still use it responsibly. Then one more thing, common sense. If it's not your own work, even if it's from an AI, it should be clearly and identified and identifiable for the reader. So finally, auditability. It's important, especially from a legal perspective, that we need to be able to ascertain what an AI has done and what made a decision. So depending on which field you're working from, the folding example we had earlier, it's good to know that the AI can help us and get some certain answers, but it's even important that we are able to interrogate the AI and know why it created certain decisions. So the final thing there from law, it has been used to try and make use of it in adjudication, but it has not been very effective. And we have not to date found a system where we are able to suitably bypass the biases that humans code into the system. So for the near future, you will not be seeing AI adjudicating your court cases. Okay, thanks, Susan. That's from me for the moment.
Thank you, Wian, and thank you very much for adding sort of that legal perspective and sort of your insight as to what editors should do in terms of their policies, but also in terms of their practices and how they should view the usefulness of AI as such. So colleagues, we still have about 13 minutes left on my watch. I'm going to return to the questions and see if we can work very effectively through them, so that we can focus. Let's focus on those that pertain to the editorial processes, etc. I see that there are some questions regarding postgraduate students and teaching. I'm just going to leave them a little bit. If we have enough time, we will address those. Let me just have a look here. So Peter Blaine has asked, how can I get a suspicion that a student report is their own work or is an AI generated without using things like Turnitin? I would like to ask all the presenters to switch on their cameras, and please feel free to answer this question. Thank you. Did you hear my question?
Can I answer?
Yes, please proceed, Kirstin.
Okay, so this is my observation. I know with something like ChatGPT, you can ask him the same question over and over again. It will each time generate something different. And the same with the detectors. So in my slides, I actually showed how AI detection varied between different tools. The most consistent way, I would say, to do the first heavy lifting would be to look at the quality of the references. Especially in the case where a student is doing, quick shortcut sort of work, to get the references in text aligned with the list of references and to actually cite those correctly is really a tough thing, and it's almost more time worthy to write the thesis than to try and fake references based on a AI generated essay. But that's just my observation at this stage.
Thank you very much, Kirstin. I'm going to move to Annemie Beer's question, who says, or who states and asks, to what data sets does AI have access? Do they have access, for instance, to publishing houses' repositories? Would publishing houses consider opening their data to AI? What will happen when AI escapes its servers and infiltrate where they are not supposed to have access?
I think I can answer this in part. Maybe Kirstin has a better understanding of the data sets that are used by all the different tools, but I know it varies. I know, for instance, for Scite, for instance, they have been spending time creating agreements with publishers to be able to use even the subscription paywalled literature in developing their product. So I'm sure there's variables. I'm sure the original ChatGPT only used the open literature, so it's probably preprint servers, open access papers, etc., which is much more limited. So I think a lot of this is variable and in negotiations.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, Kirstin?
Yeah, so it depends what sort of AI tool you're using. For example, I forgot. Perplexity is a tool. Perplexity AI is a tool it's almost like a search engine on steroids. Using AI, and most of the sources are open access. It uses things like ResearchGate and LinkedIn and that. But then there are others like Semantic Scholar that actually has established agreements with a whole series, like you said, Daniel, preprint servers, publishers, Wiley, SSRN, Sage, a whole list of databases and publishers to actually source their data from. So it really just depends what sort of AI tools you are using.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question then. And that is then, I just want to acknowledge that Luciano Panapucci has actually dropped us some very useful information there and some suggestions that one can include in your editorial policies, and that journals can be held accountable for how they view AI, as well as sort of the authors that submit to that particular journal. So he addressed the whole accountability issue right there. So thank you very much, Luciano, for that very useful statements on author transparency and the requirements as such. And then Hanel Sadi van Gijssen comment and says that journal can also consider interactive peer review as done by the Frontiers group of journals to reduce AI involvement in peer review. Any views or comment in that statement?
I know there's been some experiments with interactive peer review. I think also the IOP Publishing, the Institute of Physics, has a few of their journals that allow such interactive peer review. I think that is an opportunity to work past the use of ChatGPT and other AI tools in the peer review, because supposedly an open discussion. However, one could see that maybe the possibility exists to have a couple of humans along with an AI tool have a conversation. That would be an interesting test and result as to whether or not interactive peer review can actually incorporate AI, but in a much clearer, delineated way, where you have that human intervention to clarify all the issues associated with the tool and its training set.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of talk about different ways to improve peer review, and I think it's really important to keep looking at these areas. I mean, the problem we always have, I mean, science itself has not experimented with sort of open peer review of unpublished papers, but you know, when you open up papers for comment, or when preprints encourage open peer review, the problem is getting people to do it. And the problem is getting substantive, high quality peer reviews. You know, difficult enough to just get short comments, difficult to get substantive peer reviews for a paper. And I think most editors will tell you they put in a huge amount of time into trying to get papers peer reviewed. So it's a nice idea, but I have not seen it really work in practice. But of course, there's also post-publication peer review. So the more people engage in that, there's also the idea of making peer review transparent, which is another thing that could play in here. And another point is reviewer training, just to be sure that you know, scientists understand what is expected in peer review. So
thank you very much. So we also have another question from Natalia Seremai that asks that would commercial or academic publishers have a responsibility to disclose that AI was used by the authors in the making of a publication, for example, on an imprint page?
I would say, I mean, our policies currently are that it can't be used. So if it was used in one of our papers without the editor knowing, we would, at the moment, consider that misconduct. But if we knew about it, and if we had allowed it, definitely it would have to be declared. So probably in the acknowledgement section, maybe depending on how extensively it's used in the method section, as I think Kirstin pointed out, like really transparently say what was done. But yes, it would absolutely need to be transparent.
Thank you. Anybody else that would like to add?
I think I agree. I think rather than it being an extra statement by the publisher or the journal, I think just having policies in place that require the authors to make a clear statement within the paper is probably suitable and enough. I don't think we have to overplay the fact that AI tools had been used in a paper. I think the authors can make it clear, and then it just becomes sort of a natural piece of the literature. Just again, just a tool that helps in the research environment, and it's treated as such.
Thank you very much. Kirstin, I'm not sure if you would like to just comment very quickly, because I would like to close this webinar. From Lynette Jacobs, that says that her version of Turnitin has an AI score indicated, but so far all give a 0%. Has anybody tested it against other AI detection software? Just very quickly.
Yeah, I definitely did an extensive test, including pay a couple of dollars to buy some of those tools, and it's inconsistent between the different tools. For example, something that Turnitin AI flags as 79% AI generated, GPT-0 will say 0. So it's really inconsistent, and you can actually, my suspicion is it depends. There's actually, I asked ChatGPT for AI detection statement, and it said that it cannot encourage that, but then I asked it to write a piece so that it cannot be detected by AI, and it actually generated that. But I haven't run it through these detection tools, but the detection tools are inconsistent. And I think it would be nice, as I suggested in my presentation, to have a combination of tools if you're really interested in picking up AI generated content.
Thank you, Kirstin. I just saw that there came a actually very important question in. Please, colleagues, if you can just give me a very short answer. Any of you, what is it to stop predatory journals loading their journals into AI platforms? This could pollute the databases and create more problems for anyone using them. Any views, please?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to training sets. I think a lot of predatory journals use open access as a leverage point. And so I would imagine already many of these predatory journals are available as a training set. I think one of the other speakers had mentioned the potential of having a human intervention somehow. Can you have a way where you work with the teams that produce these AIs to really look through the literature and actually have a better way of defining what sources to use? Because again, it's the tool is only as good as its training set.
Thank you very much for that answer. Indeed, and I agree. Colleagues, we have now come to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for participating and attending this webinar. I also want to thank our speakers. Thank you very much for the incredible expertise that you brought to the table. I think personally, I feel far more satisfied that we have addressed sort of this issue in the context of editorial processes. And I think our editors that have attended this meeting would agree that there's a better sense of what is the feeling around AI and ChatGPT specifically. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for SciELO Brazil for their support, and thank you very much to the ASAF staff for all their arrangements at the back. And have a good morning, have a good afternoon, and then have a good evening until we meet again. Thank you very much, and goodbye.